What if I told you cavemen had straighter, healthier teeth than most of us, without ever seeing a dentist? No braces, no fluoride, no fancy mouthwash, yet their jaws grew wide, their smiles stayed strong, and cavities were almost unheard of. Meanwhile, we battle crooked teeth, endless fillings, and pricey orthodontics. So what went so wrong? Stay with me, because the answer reveals a hidden truth about how our modern lives quietly sabotage the very smiles we're trying so hard to protect. Long before dental clinics gleamed with sterile tools and the reassuring scent of antiseptics, long before braces twisted their way across youthful teeth, humanity was already smiling, effortlessly. It all began with a single dusty excavation site somewhere in the wind-swept reaches of Europe. A group of archaeologists, brushing away centuries of soil, gently lifted from the earth the skull of a human who had walked this planet tens of thousands of years ago. They expected to find cracks, gaps, and a battlefield of decay in those ancient jaws. After all, wasn't prehistoric life brutal and unsanitary? Yet what stared back at them was astonishing. Rows of strong, broad teeth sat neatly aligned in robust jaws. No ugly crowding, no black pits of rot boring into enamel. It was as if time itself had forgotten to gnaw at these remains. Scientists gathered around, passing the skull hand to hand, marveling. Could it really be that people who lived in cold caves, who hunted beasts and tore its sinew with bare hands, had more flawless teeth than modern citizens armed with toothbrushes, floss, and minty mouthwash? This discovery wasn't a lonely fluke. More and more skeletal finds poured in from dig sites across continents, from the sun-baked plains of Africa to damp European caves. Again and again, researchers found skulls with jawbones that could put even Hollywood stars to shame. The teeth sat proud and evenly spaced, framed by powerful arches of bone. It defied logic. How could humanity's distant ancestors, deprived of any dental hygiene as we know it, boast such perfect oral health? The initial wave of shock turned quickly into fascination, and then into a dogged pursuit of answers. Teams began cataloging these ancient dental marvels with meticulous precision. Measurements of tooth width and spacing, microscopic studies of enamel wear, analysis of chemical residues trapped in fossilized plaque, a grimy time capsule of ancient meals. Each piece of evidence deepened the puzzle. Modern dentists, roped into interdisciplinary conferences, examined casts of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon jaws with professional awe. Here were teeth untouched by cavities, uncorrupted by infections that today would have us dialing our insurance hotlines. Orthodontists found themselves almost wistful. These Stone Age mouths had natural symmetry that made braces seem absurd. And it wasn't only about cavities or the lack of them. These prehistoric jaws told stories etched in bone structure itself. Their wide, U-shaped dental arches were roomier than ours, easily accommodating wisdom teeth that so often wreak havoc in modern mouths. There were no desperate impactions, no molars jammed sideways into tender gum. Instead, these teeth emerged into spacious rows, fulfilling their purpose without fanfare. Even more perplexing, these people lived without the so-called miracles of fluoride, antiseptic rinses, and sophisticated drills. They didn't gargle chemical solutions or schedule twice-yearly cleanings. They didn't have access to orthodontic wires to tug recalcitrant teeth into line. Their toothbrushes were sticks or chewed fibers at best. And yet, they carried broad, confident smiles right to the end of their days. Why? What had nature provided them that we lost along the way? And if our genes remain nearly identical to theirs, how did our jaws become so cramped, our enamel so vulnerable, our visits to the dentist so inevitable? As word of these findings filtered out into popular magazines and documentaries, the public's curiosity soared. The idea was tantalizing that in our scramble toward civilization, we may have left behind something as fundamental as healthy, naturally straight teeth. The fossil record wasn't just a grim reminder of hardship and primitive struggle. It contained an enviable secret, one etched into every fossilized grin. And so began a scientific odyssey that would travel through anthropology, nutrition, evolutionary biology, and modern lifestyle studies, all to untangle this curious mystery of ancient smiles. Because hidden inside these fossilized mouths might lie clues to why today so many of us dread the dental chair, and why those who came long before us, without even knowing it, were the true champions of dental health. They were us. That's perhaps the most unsettling, mesmerizing realization that crept up on scientists the deeper they dug into the Earth's memory. Those powerful jaws cradling perfect teeth, those broad cheekbones supporting confident arches, they didn't belong to some distant branch of humanity that evolution cast aside. They were our direct kin, a genetic mirror image, separated by a chasm of years, not by any fundamental blueprint of life. When researchers began sequencing ancient DNA from well-preserved remains, they found what at first seemed almost boring, a staggering similarity to modern Homo sapiens. Gene after gene, code after code, lined up with our own. There were minor variations, sure, subtle tweaks that gave them slightly different immune responses or hair textures, but absolutely nothing that could explain why their mouths seemed to be sculpted by divine hands, while ours often require mechanical intervention to even approximate nature's design. This was the point where the puzzle turned from biological curiosity into a profound question about what it means to be human. If the script written into our cells is nearly the same, then why do modern dentists spend countless hours battling crooked teeth, impacted molars, rampant decay? Why do orthodontists build entire careers what once required no help at all? To unravel this, scientists began to turn their gaze away from our genes and toward the stage upon which those genes perform, our environment. They delved into the epigenetic orchestra, the intricate dance where genes are switched on or off, dialed up or muted, in response to what we eat, how we breathe, what we chew. Suddenly, the mystery's heart started to beat in new places. Because those ancient humans lived lives that sculpted their faces from the moment they drew their first breath. Their diets, their habits, even the simple act of keeping mouths closed or open at rest, all of it sent messages cascading through hormonal pathways and growth factors that molded their bones day by day, year by year. Their genetic foundation was the same as ours, but the house built upon it was assembled with raw materials and stresses wildly different from the plush modern world. One of the most astonishing insights came from comparing skulls of prehistoric hunter-gatherers to those from early farming communities just a few thousand years later. It was like flipping a switch. Suddenly, jaws narrowed, dental arches pinched inward, teeth began to overlap and twist. The transition didn't take millions of years. It happened shockingly fast on an evolutionary clock, in mere centuries. And since our underlying DNA hadn't changed in such a brief window, the culprit had to be something else. The rise of agriculture, and with it, a softer, carbohydrate-laden diet, fundamentally altered the forces acting on growing faces. Little children no longer needed to tug at sinewy meat or crack hard nuts with determined molars. Their jaws faced fewer demands. The muscles powering them weakened, and the bone structures responded by growing less robust. A jaw that isn't exercised doesn't fully expand, And in this narrower frame, teeth find themselves in a crowded mess, jostling for limited space. Meanwhile, the very substances we chewed and swallowed were different. The hunter-gatherer's menu was wildly diverse, loaded with micronutrients that acted like tiny architects, instructing cells to lay down strong enamel and dense bone. By contrast, the early farmer's plate leaned heavily on grains, often stripped of their nutritional coating, or loaded with phytates that bound precious minerals, preventing them from fortifying teeth and skeleton alike. But diet was only the first clue. Modern researchers also discovered that ancient children typically spent longer periods nursing, and once weaned, graduated immediately to challenging foods that demanded serious chewing. This mechanical workout didn't merely fill stomachs, it was like sending each growing jaw to the gym every day. The bones responded by broadening, the dental arch sweeping out gracefully, leaving ample room for each tooth to emerge in orderly succession. Even something as seemingly trivial as how we breathe played a pivotal role. Anthropologists noticed that ancient skulls almost universally displayed broad nasal cavities and wide palates, markers of habitual nose breathing. Today, countless children grow up with chronic allergies, blocked sinuses, or simply the habit of slack-jawed mouth breathing, all of which disrupt the balanced forces that shape the mid-face, often leading to long, narrow jaws and the dental chaos that follows. And so the story unfolded. It wasn't that our ancestors were genetically gifted with perfect teeth, it was that their lives, harsh, rugged, relentlessly physical, provided exactly the right stimuli to coax every latent genetic potential into its healthiest expression. Where we lean on processed convenience, they leaned into nature's brutal abundance, and their bodies, jaws included, rose to the occasion. This revelation flipped the entire narrative. We weren't unfortunate inheritors of flawed DNA. Instead, we were living in a kind of self-made mismatch, where our modern lifestyle, plush, effortless, nutrient-sparse yet calorie-dense, short-circuited the ancient developmental cues still coded within us. The same genes that once built powerful faces now labored under alien conditions, yielding results that often sent us to orthodontists and oral surgeons to manually fix what nature once handled with silent grace. In this light, the perfect teeth of pitted cave skulls became more than an archaeological curiosity. They stood as stark, eloquent reminders of what human beings are designed to be, and how profoundly we've drifted from that design. The evidence was literally written across our faces, or rather, in the faces we no longer quite develop. And the haunting question remained: if our blueprints are the same, what would happen if we tried, even in small ways, to live again by the rules of the deep past? Their smiles, fossilized yet almost alive, seemed to whisper a challenge across time. Reclaim what is still yours to reclaim before it fades completely from the human form. If you could walk silently through the misty forests or sun-scorched plains of the Paleolithic world and watch a band of early humans gather their meals, the first thing you'd notice is how vividly different their relationship with food was from ours. There were no neat rows of packaged goods, no bright, sugary treats promising instant pleasure. Their diet was a living pursuit, an unending quest that tested cunning, endurance, and the sheer will to survive each day. From dawn, small hunting groups would slip through the wilderness, tracking the faintest signs left by animals. A broken twig here, a tuft of fur snagged on a bush there, each clue part of a larger puzzle. When they succeeded, the reward was a heavy, warm carcass that promised days of nourishment. Whether it was a lean deer, a shaggy bison, or something smaller like a rabbit, this meat was far from the neatly trimmed cuts we lay on our plates. It was dense muscle fiber, rich connective tissue, and marrow hidden deep inside bones, all of it demanding vigorous chewing, pulling, and grinding. Meanwhile, others in the group fanned out with woven baskets or leather pouches, foraging with practiced eyes. They gathered nuts whose tough shells cracked only under sustained pressure from strong jaws. Acorns, hazelnuts, and wild almonds weren't just snacks. They were small packages of fat and protein, often bitter, sometimes requiring soaking or roasting, always demanding effort. Closer to rivers or seashores, hands and primitive nets darted into cold water to grasp writhing fish. These slippery prizes offered soft flesh offset by crisp bones and chewy skins. Every bite a varied challenge that kept jaws active and teeth engaged. It wasn't unusual for entire families to sit together, splitting open fish heads to suck out tender brains or crunching smaller bones for their rich mineral content. Then there were the fruits. But the wild berries and apples of prehistory bore little resemblance to today's oversized, sugar-loaded cousins. They were often tiny, tart, their sweetness modest, balanced by fibrous pulp and sometimes even a hint of bitterness. Chewing these fruits worked the teeth thoroughly, mixing the acidity with natural fibers that subtly scrubbed the enamel. Wild figs, crab apples, clusters of blackberries. These were treats tied directly to the rhythms of the seasons, fleeting and never in excess. Roots and tubers offered yet another layer to their diet. Dug from stubborn earth with sticks and bare hands, they emerged gnarled, tough-skinned, sometimes slightly gritty with soil that clung despite repeated rinsing. Eating them wasn't like biting into a soft-boiled potato. It meant tearing through dense fibers, sometimes pounding them first with stones to break down their stubborn structure. This constant mechanical challenge was like a daily workout for their jaws, naturally guiding bones and muscles to grow robust and balanced. And crucially, all of this food was raw in its essence, not necessarily uncooked, though much was roasted over open flames, but raw in the sense that it was unrefined, untouched by any industrial process. There were no flours sifted into delicate dust, no refined oils stripped of their natural partners. Grains were rare and, when found, consumed whole and coarse, often sprouted or simply chewed as is. The complete absence of added sugars was perhaps the most striking feature of their culinary world. Honey existed, but it was a rare, risky delight, harvested from angry swarms only on occasion, and shared carefully among many. The regular flood of glucose that our modern bodies take for granted simply didn't exist. Each sweet bite was seasonal, earned, and moderate. Without cakes, candies, sodas, or hidden syrups woven into every packaged meal, their blood sugar rarely soared or crashed. Their mouths were spared the relentless acid attacks fueled by sugar-loving bacteria. Instead, their oral microbiome thrived in a balance that modern dentists can only dream of restoring. In this landscape of tough meats, crunchy nuts, fibrous fruits, and earthy roots, their teeth and jaws weren't just surviving. They were being continuously sculpted by the demands of their diet. Every bite was an act of growth, of maintaining the architecture nature intended. Chewing wasn't merely a way to break down food. It was the silent, powerful force shaping broad dental arches, spacing teeth neatly, and keeping gums resilient. Watching a Paleolithic family feast by the glow of a campfire would reveal no processed softness, no effortless swallows of pure sugar. Instead, you'd see children gnawing strips of sinew, cracking shells, tugging at chewy rinds, their faces alive with motion, their developing jaws receiving all the cues needed to grow wide and strong. And perhaps most telling of all, without modern temptations to short-circuit their biology, they ate only until hunger eased. There was no compulsive reaching for one more cookie, no tidal wave of cravings driven by a chemical cocktail of salt, fat, and sugar designed in a laboratory. Their satisfaction came directly from the balance struck by nature. Proteins to build, fats to sustain, carbohydrates locked in fibrous matrices that took effort to unlock. In this way, the diet of hunter-gatherers did far more than fill bellies. It laid down the invisible blueprints for dental health that our genetics were primed to follow. Blueprints that so often fail to unfold in today's ultra-processed abundance. Their menu was a living, chewing, jaw-shaping manifesto that needed no dentist's approval. It simply worked, as elegantly and ruthlessly as the wilderness itself. Imagine for a moment being born into a world where every single meal was a small battle of strength, patience, and raw mechanical force. From the moment your first tiny teeth pushed through tender gums, life would begin training your jaws in a way no modern orthodontist could ever replicate. Nothing came pre-sliced, pureed, or softened. Food was tough, fibrous, resistant. A daily exercise that molded your mouth as reliably as weights sculpt a bodybuilder. For the hunter-gatherers of the Paleolithic world, chewing was not a passive act. It was hard labor, performed multiple times a day. Every sinewy strip of roasted game demanded long, grinding motions to tear muscle fibers apart. Even fat and marrow, though rich and slippery, were often hidden behind thick bones that needed cracking and gnawing. Roots and tubers, roughly cleaned but still holding stubborn grit, pushed teeth to grind and crush persistently. Nuts played their own role in this natural orthodontics regime. Shelled by stones or strong hands, but rarely reduced to the neat, textureless butters we spread today, they still demanded rigorous mastication. Jaw muscles clenched and released over and over. Teeth met force with equal force, and the very bones of the face responded. Because bone is a living tissue, not a static block, it remodels in direct response to the stresses placed upon it. The more resistance encountered by growing jaws, the more cells laid down fresh layers of dense structure, broadening the arches that cradle teeth. Anthropologists studying skulls from across millennia have repeatedly documented this remarkable difference. The jaws of ancient humans flared out into wide, generous curves, providing ample room for each tooth to take its rightful place. Crowding, the bane of modern dental development, was virtually non-existent. Teeth erupted in proud alignment, guided by the expansive blueprint created by years of powerful chewing. It didn't end with nuts or tough meat. Even the fruits they ate required work. Wild pears, crab apples, small tart berries, all of them came packaged in skins, seeds, or fibrous matrices that resisted casual biting. Compare that to today's smoothies, juices, or even carefully bred supermarket fruits that explode with sweetness and yield instantly to the lightest pressure. Our ancestors' food demanded attention, muscular engagement, and time. Each mouthful was an act of physical development. This constant workout of the masseter and temporalis, the major chewing muscles, did more than widen jaws. It anchored the entire dental system in a harmonious balance. Strong muscles pulled evenly on growing bones, stimulating not just lateral expansion, but also the forward growth of the maxilla, upper jaw, and mandible, lower jaw. This balanced forward and outward development created spacious dental arches that easily accommodated all 32 adult teeth. Modern children, by contrast, often glide through meals with minimal resistance. Soft breads, processed cereals, tender meats, creamy yogurts, none of these challenge the jaws. As a result, the muscles weaken, the stimulus for robust bone growth fades, and the jaws grow narrower, more retrusive. The teeth then have no choice but to twist, overlap, or push outward and inward in awkward attempts to fit themselves into undersized real estate. It's not merely speculation. Observations from traditional cultures still living close to their ancestral ways reinforce the point. Anthropologists and dentists visiting isolated tribes often find children gnawing on raw roots or tearing strips of roasted meat straight from the bone. Their jaws appear almost exaggeratedly broad by modern standards, their dental arches sweeping in generous curves. Even crowded third molars, our notorious wisdom teeth, erupt cleanly into place, fulfilling the role evolution intended. Meanwhile, studies that track migrants moving from rural communities with coarse traditional diets to cities with refined processed fare show striking changes within a single generation. Children born in urban environments, consuming soft modern diets, develop significantly narrower dental arches than their parents. Crowding and misalignments soar, setting up a lifetime of orthodontic intervention. Some orthodontic specialists have even experimented with reintroducing tough chewing regimens in children showing early signs of jaw constriction. They provide dense raw vegetables, dried meats, or specialized chewing devices to stimulate the masticatory muscles. The results, though still a developing field, point toward modest but promising improvements in jaw width and alignment, a small echo of the robust, natural shaping that once happened effortlessly. In this way, hard food didn't merely nourish the body. It was an essential, primal form of physical therapy that worked from the inside out, guiding each child's face to mature into the architecture evolution had prepared. Without it, we're left with jaws that don't quite fulfill their genetic blueprint, forcing teeth into battles for space they were never meant to fight. So when we marvel at the wide smiles of ancient skulls, it's crucial to understand they weren't born with those perfect arches by luck alone. They earned them with every stubborn mouthful, every patient grind of fibrous plants and sinew, every relentless challenge that told their bones, grow strong, grow wide, make room for what's to come. It was a silent contract with nature, signed and fulfilled thousands of times at every meal, and it left behind a legacy written in the smooth, uncrowded rows of teeth that now lie patiently beneath layers of earth, waiting to tell their story. Stand before the reconstructed face of an ancient hunter-gatherer. Gaze into the calm, almost regal proportions of that visage, and you'll see immediately that something sets it apart from our modern appearance. It isn't just about the teeth, it's about the entire architecture that framed those teeth, supported them, protected them, and displayed them with a natural symmetry most orthodontists would envy. Anthropologists who've carefully measured countless fossil skulls found a striking consistency. These people had broad, gently curving dental arches that gave every tooth ample room. But the story runs deeper than the jaws. Their cheekbones flared outward, their nasal apertures were wide, and their mid-faces projected slightly forward in a balanced, powerful harmony. The lower jaw, the mandible, was a sturdy, broad platform with thick bone that could handle enormous stresses. This wasn't a rugged, coarse look of deformity. It was a robust design that distributed forces perfectly, letting teeth sit side by side without conflict. Modern faces, by contrast, often bear signs of underdevelopment. Narrow jaws retreat into the face, the dental arches pinch inward, and teeth stack up like commuters forced into too small a train carriage. The differences are not cosmetic alone. They reach deep into function. Constricted jaws can crowd the airway, disrupt breathing, and alter tongue posture, a cascade of issues that simply didn't exist in the strong, spacious mouths of our ancestors. So what carved those powerful faces? What gave them such broad, sweeping foundations? It was partly the relentless workout provided by their diet, yes, but also the unbroken patterns of growth set in motion from infancy. As children, they nursed longer, their tongues pressing against the palate in rhythmic motions that encouraged the upper jaw to broaden naturally. Once weaned, they moved immediately to chewable foods that demanded effort, pulling and grinding that transmitted pressure through teeth up into the jawbones, signaling them to grow outward and forward. The muscles of mastication, the masseter and temporalis, were constantly activated, growing thick and strong. These muscles don't just move the jaw, they exert forces that quite literally shape the bones they attach to. Every clench, every tug at a tough strip of meat, every grind of a coarse tuber told the bone to lay down more material, to thicken, to expand. Nature's astonishing adaptability ensured that bone followed muscle, creating a face that could handle heavy loads without complaint. But there was another subtle factor: the constant posture of the mouth at rest. Modern children frequently rest with slightly open mouths, especially if allergies, enlarged adenoids, or simple habit cause mouth breathing. This position leaves the tongue low and passive. In contrast, ancient children, with wide nasal passages kept clear by their rugged outdoor life and unprocessed air, habitually breathed through their noses. Their mouths stayed closed, their tongues pressed gently against the roof of the mouth, applying a steady outward force. This simple, silent posture acted like a living retainer, guiding the palate to widen and the upper jaw to move forward into a beautifully supportive arch. By the time wisdom teeth erupted in their late teens, these young adults already possessed spacious jaw frameworks that welcomed each new molar without drama. There was no cramming, no impacted teeth forced sideways into bone. Their third molars joined the dental lineup as nature intended, not a threat requiring surgical removal, but a final piece of a complete set. This expansive growth also meant fewer places for plaque and bacteria to hide. The teeth stood upright, not twisted or tilted. Gums sealed snugly around them, creating a healthy environment that discouraged the deep pockets where infections love to thrive. The synergy of wide bones, strong muscles, and balanced forces preserved both beauty and function in a way modern orthodontics tries, often imperfectly, to replicate. When forensic anthropologists lay ancient and modern skulls side by side, the contrast is almost haunting. Our faces today often appear narrower, with receding jaws and flatter midfaces. The dental arches shrank, forcing teeth into overlapping battles for space. It isn't genetics that shifted so dramatically, it's our environment and behavior. Those ancient skulls reveal what our shared genetic blueprint is still capable of, given the right conditions. The broader faces of our ancestors weren't just about handling tough food, they also meant wider nasal passages, reducing resistance during breathing and promoting restful sleep. They supported better tongue posture, clearer speech, and a more stable bite that resisted the small destructive forces that, over years, can lead to TMJ disorders and chronic pain.
All these benefits were bundled into a design naturally perfected through thousands of daily micro-adjustments, dictated by how they chewed, breathed, and held their jaws. So the lesson their bones whisper across the ages is profound. The perfection of their smiles didn't start with the teeth. It started with the face itself, a living, responsive scaffold shaped by diet, muscle, and breath. Their jaws weren't simply bigger for aesthetic reasons, they were precisely sized to fit a complete set of teeth comfortably and to support a lifetime of rigorous use. It was an elegant system honed by necessity and environment, one that today we often try to restore, never quite matching the effortless harmony written into the lives of those who came before us.
If you could stand face to face with a person from the Paleolithic era, your eyes might first drift to the striking breadth of their face, the sturdy sweep of their cheekbones, or the confident projection of their jaws. But look a little closer, past the sun-darkened skin and the determined lines carved by a life of hunting and foraging, and you'd see something even more remarkable. A set of teeth so evenly aligned they would seem almost unnatural by today's standards. Perfect rows of teeth, like pearls fitted with uncanny precision, resting comfortably in wide, balanced arches. Not a trace of orthodontic metal, no evidence of forced correction, because none was ever needed. These ancient mouths were masterpieces of natural engineering. Each tooth erupted into its destined place without competition or crowding. From the central incisors that cut and nipped, to the sturdy molars designed for crushing, every member of the dental lineup had room to flourish. The canines didn't twist out of alignment or jut awkwardly. The premolars didn't rotate desperately to squeeze into an undersized arch. Instead, the entire arrangement formed smooth, sweeping arcs, the very picture of functional beauty. The bite, or occlusion as dentists describe it, was equally impressive. Upper and lower teeth met in harmonious opposition, distributing chewing forces evenly across the entire system. There were no exaggerated overbites or underbites, no crossbites where teeth collided in the wrong planes. This balanced occlusion meant less wear on individual teeth and less stress transmitted to the jaw joints. An elegant solution evolved over countless generations of rigorous use. Contrast that with modern mouths. Today, a staggering proportion of people grow up needing orthodontic interventions. Narrow dental arches pinch together, teeth crowd and overlap. Wisdom teeth become unwelcome intruders that must be surgically extracted. And malocclusions, misalignments in how the teeth fit together, are so common they're almost expected. Metal brackets and wires are now a rite of passage, not a rare corrective measure. Why did this happen? The answer doesn't lie in a sudden shift of our genetic code. In fact, if you could transplant the DNA of a modern child into a Paleolithic family, there's every reason to believe that child's mouth would develop just like theirs, given the same forces acting upon it. Instead, it's the absence of those ancient forces that reshapes our modern faces, or more accurately, fails to shape them. Consider the first years of life, when bone is astonishingly plastic. In the Paleolithic world, infants spent long periods breastfeeding, their tongues rhythmically pressing against the palate, widening it. Once weaned, they didn't move on to soft porridges and purees, but to shredded meats, fibrous roots, and hard nuts, foods that demanded chewing power from the very start. This constant engagement of jaw muscles stimulated the bones to grow outward and forward, creating spacious dental arches, perfectly proportioned to the complete set of human teeth. Our modern story is radically different.
Bottles often replace prolonged nursing, bypassing the natural forces of tongue and palate. Spoon-fed purees slide down without a fight. Even once children graduate to solids, these are often so soft they require little more than token chewing. The jaws simply don't receive the signals to expand to their full genetic potential. The result? Narrower arches, less room for teeth, and the inevitable crowding that sets up a lifetime of orthodontic adjustments. It goes beyond mere crowding. With jaws underdeveloped, the upper and lower teeth struggle to find their proper meeting points. Malocclusions proliferate. Deep bites where the upper front teeth cover too much of the lowers. Open bites where teeth fail to meet at all. Cross bites where the dental midlines wander off course. Each misalignment isn't just a cosmetic inconvenience. It can strain the jaw joints, wear down enamel unevenly, and even affect speech. Orthodontists have become our cultural response to this hidden epidemic. Braces and aligners painstakingly nudge teeth into better alignment, but they often do so within arches that remain too small. Teeth may be extracted to create artificial space, or expansive devices fitted to widen palates. Yet even these corrections, though often beautifully effective on the surface, rarely replicate the deep, integrated growth that happened naturally in the past. The jaws were meant to grow under sustained pressure, with bone thickening and muscles balancing every movement, a complex dance that braces can only partially imitate. It's why so many who undergo orthodontic treatment later wear retainers for years, sometimes for life. Without the underlying muscular habits and bone robustness of our ancestors, modern teeth tend to relapse, drifting back into crowded configurations. The body is always responding to forces, and when those are insufficient or imbalanced, the results inevitably show. The most humbling realization in all of this is that our genes still carry the instructions for broad, harmonious jaws and straight rows of teeth. We haven't lost the code. We've simply stopped providing the cues that tell those instructions to unfold fully. In the quiet fossil halls of museums, ancient skulls seem to grin knowingly, their teeth telling a story of how the right environment, hard, chewy, unrefined, and demanding, shaped mouths that needed no intervention to be perfect. Our modern predicament, then, isn't about genetic destiny failing us. It's about us failing to give our bodies the developmental conversation with nature that once led to faces sculpted by necessity. The elegant natural occlusion of our ancestors stands as both a marvel and a gentle admonition, whispering across millennia that beauty and function were never meant to be manufactured. They were meant to grow under conditions starkly different from our own. It's almost poetic how two humble crystals, one white and bracing on the tongue, the other sweet and seductive, came to rewrite the entire story of the human mouth. Long before dentists ever scolded children about candy or salty snacks, the twin forces of salt and sugar were already at work, quietly altering the destiny of our teeth and jaws. Their story began not with industrial candy factories or convenience store chip aisles, but thousands of years ago, when human beings first traded the wild, unpredictable generosity of wild landscapes for the steady, disciplined toil of farming. Before agriculture, hunter-gatherers roamed vast territories, plucking fruits only when the seasons allowed, chasing animals that didn't stand still, digging for roots wherever the soil offered its stubborn gifts. This life was hard, uncertain, and often short, yet it provided a striking variety of foods. Minerals, fibers, dense proteins, and natural fats rotated through their diet in complex, balanced patterns that nature dictated. Then came the first golden waves of grain. Somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, early people noticed how scattered seeds sprouted into orderly rows. The convenience was undeniable. Why chase a herd for days when you could simply plant and wait? Why wander for miles when food could be persuaded to grow right outside your door? This was the quiet beginning of civilization, and also the first tremor of a dental catastrophe waiting to unfold. As fields of wheat, barley, and later rice and maize spread across continents, diets shifted dramatically. Instead of consuming a riot of different foods, many communities leaned heavily on a single staple crop. Grains could be dried, stored, and carried through harsh seasons, a godsend against starvation. But they came with biochemical strings attached. They were rich in carbohydrates that human bodies quickly broke down into sugars, feeding not only our hungry muscles, but also the ever-present bacteria lurking in dental plaque. Yet perhaps even more consequential was the very act of processing grain into bread. Early breads weren't like our pillowy loaves, but they still transformed tough, fibrous seeds into something soft enough to eat with far less effort. Chewing these doughy morsels simply didn't require the forceful grinding that dense meats or crisp roots demanded. Over time, jaws lost the daily workouts that once sculpted wide arches, setting the stage for crowded, misaligned teeth. And bread carried another hidden hazard. Grains contain compounds called phytates, which bind minerals like calcium, magnesium, and zinc, precisely the nutrients critical for building and maintaining strong teeth and bones. In a forager's diverse diet, this wasn't a major issue. But in communities that now relied almost entirely on cereals, these anti-nutrients could starve the body of the very building blocks needed to keep enamel hard and jaws robust. Then there was salt. As agriculture grew, so did the practice of storing food. Salt was miraculous. It could preserve fish, meats, even vegetables, keeping them edible through long winters or droughts. But diets high in salt subtly changed body chemistry, influencing fluid balance and possibly contributing to slight alterations in saliva production. Saliva is the mouth's first line of defense against acid attacks and bacterial invasions. Anything that disrupts its flow can tilt the delicate balance that protects teeth. Sugar, however, was the true revolution, though its reign began slowly. Even early breads and porridges created a kind of mild sugar bath in the mouth, as enzymes in saliva broke down starches into simpler glucose. But once humans learned to cultivate sugarcane and later beets, the game changed entirely. No longer was sweetness a rare surprise found in a berry patch or an occasional raided beehive. Now it could be harvested, refined, and piled into pots. A concentrated delight that oral bacteria exploited with ruthless efficiency. Dental archaeologists can pinpoint exactly when this shift began to carve its legacy into human remains. Skulls from pre-agricultural societies show broad jaws and low levels of decay. Move just a few thousand years forward into communities dependent on farming, and suddenly cavities appear with alarming frequency. By the time sugar became a global commodity, shipped across oceans in gleaming crystals, decay exploded. Teeth riddled with dark lesions, abscesses boring into jawbones. Children's mouths already crumbling before adulthood, these became the hallmarks of civilization's sweet triumph. It's tempting to think of salt and sugar as simple flavorings, a sprinkle here, a spoonful there. But in truth, they underpinned sweeping changes in human biology. Salt enabled food storage, supporting larger, sedentary populations that abandoned the nomadic chewing challenges of their ancestors. Sugar, first through starch and later in its raw, crystalline glory, offered rapid energy at a devastating cost to dental health.
The twin rise of these substances didn't just make meals more palatable, they quietly dismantled the ancient scaffolding that had long kept human mouths healthy. Jaws that once grew wide and powerful under the stress of tough chewing now developed narrower, less resilient structures. Teeth that once stood proudly spaced now found themselves forced into crowded lines, more vulnerable than ever to decay fed by a relentless parade of fermentable carbs. In this way, the story of bread, salt, and sugar is more than a culinary footnote. It's a profound saga of how civilization, in its quest for stability and pleasure, accidentally betrayed the very mouths that had served humanity so well for millennia. Each soft bite of bread, each preserved slab of salted meat, each seductive sprinkle of sweetness, these were small revolutions that together reshaped our faces and set the stage for the dental struggles we now fight to control. Imagine the first warm mouthful of steaming porridge ever consumed by human lips. Somewhere in a modest village on the banks of a slow-moving river, a woman stirred a pot over a crackling fire, coaxing hard grains into a tender mash. Nearby, children gathered, eager for a taste of this fragrant new comfort. When she lifted a wooden spoon to their mouths, history pivoted on its silent hinge. In that single moment, the relationship between human teeth and the food they mastered, a relationship forged over countless millennia of tearing, grinding, cracking, and gnawing, began to change forever. Before this quiet culinary revolution, human mouths were powerful workshops. Jaws moved with commanding precision. Muscles clamped down with hundreds of pounds of force, and teeth met in determined clashes designed to break the toughest offerings of nature. Meat was stringy, dense with connective tissue. Tubers and roots were wiry, gritty, demanding. Nuts resisted until they split, offering kernels that still needed thorough mastication. Even fruits, when available, were smaller, more fibrous, their sweetness locked inside resilient flesh. But cooking changed everything. Heat softened stubborn fibers. It unwound proteins, gelatinized starches, transformed rigid plant structures into yielding masses. Suddenly, the enormous mechanical challenge presented by nature was pre-processed by fire and boiling water. What once required a symphony of jaw movements could now be swallowed with just a handful of chews, or, in the case of thin gruels, with none at all. Bread was equally subversive. Unlike raw grains that had to be cracked and chewed extensively to unlock their nutrients, bread delivered carbohydrates already ground, mixed, and baked into textures that nearly melted in the mouth. Early loaves might have been coarse by today's standards, but they still represented a monumental leap away from the unprocessed, rigid foods of the hunter-gatherer diet. Even rudimentary flatbreads demanded dramatically less effort from teeth and jaws. This abrupt drop in chewing demands had far-reaching consequences. Bone is not a static substance. It responds continuously to the forces applied to it. Under the old regime of tough foods, the jaws were under constant pressure. Muscles tugged mightily with every meal, sending signals that encouraged the bones to grow wide and dense, making space for a full complement of teeth. The dental arches flared generously, allowing each tooth to settle comfortably in its designated position. As the diet softened, these vital mechanical cues disappeared. Children who grew up on porridges, stews, and breads simply didn't have to work as hard to process their meals. Their masseter and temporalis muscles, the main engines of chewing, exerted less force. Without this powerful stimulation, the bones of the jaw didn't receive the same instructions to grow outward and robust.
Instead, they developed narrower, more retrusive shapes. The dental arches curved inward. There was less room for teeth to erupt in neat rows, setting the stage for the crowding and misalignments that became the hallmarks of modern mouths. Even the cheekbones, which anchor the upper jaw and define the width of the midface, responded to this new, easier life. In pre-agricultural skulls, zygomatic arches, the bones that create our cheek contours, swept outward in proud, wide curves, a testament to the immense forces generated by robust chewing. These broad scaffolds didn't just support facial aesthetics, they gave the upper dental arch plenty of lateral space. As chewing demands waned, the growth of these cheekbones softened too. Faces became flatter, narrower, with reduced room for teeth and even, over generations, slightly altered airways. Dental anthropologists examining skeletal remains from different eras have traced this transformation with near clinical precision. Skulls from hunter-gatherer societies consistently show expansive palates and U-shaped dental arches, where teeth line up like soldiers with ample personal space. Move forward just a few thousand years into populations heavily reliant on agriculture, and the arches constrict into more V-shaped patterns. The teeth begin to jostle, twist, and overlap, the early unmistakable signs of malocclusion. All of this happened without a single change in our genetic blueprint. The DNA remained ready to build wide jaws and broad cheekbones, but the environmental signals had shifted. It was as if builders were waiting for a command that never came, resulting in structures only partially realized. The same genes that once produced powerful, spacious faces now quietly acquiesced to reduced demands, constructing narrower frameworks that could no longer comfortably house all 32 adult teeth. This quiet revolution in texture didn't stop at bread and porridge. As cooking techniques evolved and diversified, humans devised ever more ways to make food soft and accommodating. Boiling, stewing, fermenting, and later refining grains into delicate flours led to an even further decrease in chewing requirements. Each advance in culinary art, from the humble clay pot to the polished metal cauldron, reduced the jaw's workload, invisibly reshaping the human face one generation at a time. So, while we often celebrate the march of human innovation, the taming of fire, the cultivation of crops, the invention of cooking, it came with hidden costs etched directly into our bones. Our ancestors' broad faces and well-aligned teeth weren't merely lucky accidents. They were the inevitable outcome of living in a world that demanded constant, vigorous engagement with tough, unyielding foods. Once that world gave way to bowls of steaming mush and slices of tender bread, the forces that had so faithfully guided our facial growth receded into memory. Today, the legacy of this revolution lives on in every crowded smile, every child fitted with braces, every adult struggling with dental complications rooted not in bad genes, but in a modern diet that asked too little of the jaws. The story of soft food is a story of unintended consequences, how comfort, convenience, and culinary pleasure quietly dismantled the rugged scaffolding that nature once built to last a lifetime. If you stand in the baking aisle of any supermarket today, you'll find yourself surrounded by an almost reverent celebration of grain. Rows upon rows of breads, whole wheat, multigrain, oat, rye, spelt, promise heart health and wholesome goodness. Boxes of cereal proclaim their vitamin fortifications. Flour bags tout their purity. For thousands of years, grain has been painted as the very foundation of civilization, the miracle crop that freed humans from the uncertainty of foraging. But woven deep into this golden narrative is a quiet, often overlooked threat
that begins not with how grain is prepared, but with how it's built by nature itself. Because inside every seed lies a defensive arsenal, chemical compounds carefully evolved to protect it until it has the chance to sprout and carry on its lineage. Among these, phytates stand out as the most subtle saboteurs of human dental and skeletal health. Phytates, or phytic acid, are found in significant concentrations in the bran and outer layers of grains like wheat, barley, rice, and corn. To the plant, these molecules are essential, locking away phosphorus in a safe form until the seed is ready to germinate. To humans, however, phytates pose a nutritional conundrum. Once ingested, they have a magnetic affinity for key minerals: calcium, magnesium, iron, and zinc, binding to them tightly in the gut. This means that even if a meal is rich in these vital nutrients, phytates can effectively sequester them, carrying them out of the body unused. For teeth and jaws, this is no small concern. Calcium and phosphorus are the very building blocks of enamel, the hard outer layer that shields teeth from bacterial acid attacks. Magnesium and zinc play supporting roles in bone metabolism and immune health, further safeguarding the structures that anchor teeth. When phytates bind these minerals and escort them out through waste, they quietly undercut the raw materials our bodies depend on to grow strong jaws and resilient enamel. And grains didn't stop there. Many cereals, especially when ground into fine flours and transformed into bread, also carry natural organic acids that can subtly tip the mouth's environment toward acidity. Each bite of soft bread sticks lovingly to the teeth, creating miniature feasts for bacteria. As these microbes feast, they produce acids of their own, compounding the effect. Over time, this constant exposure weakens enamel, opening tiny pathways for decay to set in. Contrast this with the tough, mineral-rich diet of hunter-gatherers. Their meals were naturally balanced by alkaline-forming vegetables and bone broths teeming with bioavailable calcium and phosphorus. They didn't face meals that simultaneously provided carbohydrates to feed bacteria and compounds that whisked away essential minerals. The delicate ecosystem of the mouth, from saliva composition to the microscopic balance of oral bacteria, thrived under those ancestral conditions. Bread, in particular, became the quiet architect of much dental decline. As agriculture advanced, bread transitioned from coarse, partially sprouted loaves that might have reduced phytate content somewhat, to more refined, fluffy products that offered little nutritional compensation for their hidden risks. Milling stripped away germ and bran, concentrating carbohydrates and discarding natural fats and proteins that could slow down bacterial feeding. What remained was a near-perfect substrate for decay: soft, clingy, sugar-laden dough that slipped easily into every crevice around and between teeth. Dental archaeologists can see this story written starkly in skeletal records. Skull after skull from early agricultural societies shows a sudden uptick in carious lesions, those dark, hollowed craters that mark the relentless work of acid on enamel. The jaws themselves also began to narrow, not just from softer chewing demands, but likely exacerbated by mineral deficiencies during critical growth periods. With less robust bones, teeth had even less room to emerge in orderly rows.
Even modern attempts to fortify breads and cereals with added minerals and vitamins can't completely undo this intricate biochemical sabotage. While synthetic iron or calcium might be sprinkled back in, the phytates still present in many whole grain products can continue to bind and reduce absorption. The underlying conflict remains unresolved. In this way, the story of grains is more than a testament to human ingenuity. It's also a subtle caution about unintended consequences. By leaning heavily on seeds designed by nature to protect themselves, to hold on to their nutrients until sprouting, we inadvertently set up a nutritional tug-of-war that our teeth and jaws often lose. So when we marvel at the perfect dental arches of ancient hunter-gatherers, or puzzle over the widespread dental issues that shadow even well-fed modern societies, we should look not just to sugar or mechanical chewing forces, but to these hidden chemical players. Because deep inside every humble loaf of bread or fragrant bowl of cereal lies a quiet challenge to our biology. A reminder that evolution designed grains to serve their own future first, and our bodies only second. And the teeth, those patient witnesses to all we eat, bear silent testimony to the cost. If we trace the human love affair with sweetness back through the corridors of time, we find it began not in bustling medieval markets or Renaissance banquets, but far earlier in the sun-drenched fields and temple complexes of the ancient world. Even before sugar as we know it entered the human story, people were already drawn irresistibly to whatever nature offered as glimpses of its most decadent flavor, sweetness. In ancient Egypt, records from as early as 4,000 years ago reveal an appetite for confections that bordered on religious devotion. Bakers mixed dates and honey into dough, shaping pastries that were offered to gods and consumed by those who could afford such luxury. Honey was the primary sweetener of choice, harvested from carefully tended hives or taken at risk from wild bees. And it flavored everything from breads to beer. But it was precious, demanding time, labor, and often the courage to brave stinging defenders. This kept sweetness a delicacy, never abundant enough to wreak widespread harm on teeth.
Likewise, in Rome, lavish feasts sometimes ended with fruits drenched in honey or small cakes soaked in sweet wine. Roman cooks developed sophisticated recipes for creating sticky desserts, layering nuts and honey into what might pass today as primitive baklava. Writers like Apicius included entire sections on sweet treats, but again, honey's cost and the effort required to harvest it kept such indulgences within reach of the wealthy or for special celebrations. Most Romans, like most Egyptians, lived primarily on cereals, legumes, occasional meat, and seasonal fruits, foods that did not flood their mouths with fermentable sugars on a daily basis. Dental examinations of Egyptian mummies and Roman skeletons do show cavities, especially among elites who could afford sweet luxuries. Yet the real explosion of dental decay awaited a later, more potent player on the stage: sugarcane. Sugarcane itself is ancient, domesticated in New Guinea over 8,000 years ago, and gradually spreading across India and Southeast Asia. Early methods involved simply chewing the cane to extract its juice, offering brief seasonal sweetness without the refined crystalline sugar we know today. It was only in India around 500 CE that techniques emerged to boil sugarcane juice into concentrated crystals, khanda, the linguistic ancestor of our word candy. Trade carried these early sugar-making secrets westward. By the time of the Crusades, returning soldiers and traders spoke of this astonishing Eastern luxury. Slowly, sugar found its way into European courts, where it was treated almost like a medicine, prescribed for digestion or blended with spices to preserve fruit. Apothecaries, not bakers, were often the first to stock sugar, selling it by the ounce. But everything changed in the Middle Ages, especially from the 11th century onward, when Crusaders' contacts with the Middle East accelerated sugar's introduction to Europe. The taste for it spread rapidly among aristocracies. Banquets featured extravagant sugar sculptures, candied nuts, and preserved fruits. In royal courts, sugar ceased to be purely medicinal and became a sign of conspicuous wealth and cultural sophistication. Still, its expense kept the damage limited to wealthy mouths. This is precisely what early dental evidence shows. Elite burials from medieval Europe often reveal teeth pitted with dark cavities, while the poorer populations, still subsisting mainly on coarser breads and simple vegetables, fared somewhat better, at least until sugar production exploded.
The true catastrophe arrived with the rise of vast colonial plantations. By the 15th and 16th centuries, European powers began to establish sprawling sugarcane estates in the Caribbean and the Americas. The brutal efficiency of enslaved labor made sugar suddenly abundant and dramatically cheaper. No longer an exotic, rationed treat, it flowed into European ports by the shipload, finding its way into every household and onto every table. By the late Middle Ages and the dawn of the Renaissance, sugar was incorporated into daily fare, sprinkled over porridge, stirred into tea, baked into breads, layered into pastries. This near-constant availability fundamentally rewrote the chemical environment of the human mouth. Oral bacteria that thrive on sugar multiplied beyond anything our ancestors ever encountered. With every sweet indulgence, these microbes produced acids that bathed teeth, etching tiny weaknesses into enamel that grew into gaping cavities. The archaeological record is unflinching. Skeletons from medieval graveyards, especially from prosperous cities, often display rampant dental decay. Entire molars are hollowed out, roots exposed, abscesses having eaten pathways through jawbones, grim testimony to infections that must have caused searing pain. Chronic dental disease didn't just mean tooth loss. It could spread to the jaw and even threaten life itself in an age without antibiotics or modern surgery. This was the true sugar revolution, not simply a delight to the palate, but a profound biological shift. Human mouths that for hundreds of thousands of years evolved to handle modest, seasonal sugars now faced relentless assaults. Unlike honey, which was costly and limited by nature's whims, refined cane sugar could be produced in staggering quantities, stored indefinitely, and woven into every conceivable dish. In this light, the medieval fascination with sugar wasn't merely culinary. It was the beginning of a new chapter in human health, a story where pleasure and pain became intimately linked. As sweetness moved from rare luxury to everyday staple, it left a legacy etched deeply into the bones of our ancestors, visible to this day in museum cases filled with grinning skulls, teeth blackened and hollowed by the seductive promise of sugar. It was a promise civilization could not resist, even as it paid the price, one crumbling tooth at a time. Stand on a crowded street corner in any modern city, and you're surrounded by the triumph of industrialization, the restless flow of goods, the glitter of neon signs advertising pastries and soda, the endless stream of packaged snacks tucked under people's arms. It feels almost eternal, as though humanity was always meant to live this way. Yet step back just 200 or 300 years, and you'd find a world astonishingly different, not only in its pace of life, but in the very health of the human mouth. The Industrial Revolution was more than coal smoke and roaring looms. It was a radical reshaping of how food was produced, distributed, and consumed. Nowhere did this seismic shift make itself felt more profoundly than in the small battlegrounds behind our lips. In barely a century, teeth that had once stood firm for decades began to crumble at alarming rates, casualties of two technological marvels that were supposed to make life easier: mass-produced sugar and refined flour. Sugar was first. By the late 1700s, the colonial sugar empires had grown vast, with Caribbean plantations and enslaved laborers feeding an insatiable European demand. But it was the 19th century that truly unleashed sugar upon the world. Advances in plantation machinery, shipping, and eventually beet sugar processing in colder climates meant sugar could now be churned out by the ton, transported cheaply, and sold to even modest households. What had been a luxury item for aristocrats became a daily fixture for the working classes. This was celebrated as a democratic triumph. Tea sweetened with sugar became a ritual that bound miners, mill workers, and housewives alike. Bakers stuffed pastries with jams and custards. Grocery shelves offered jars of fruit preserves and candies by the handful. For the first time in history, ordinary people could afford to drench their days in sweetness. But alongside this gustatory delight came a silent siege on enamel. Oral bacteria, ever opportunistic, feasted on this steady influx of sugar, producing acids that bathed teeth in corrosive assaults many times each day. And it wasn't just sugar. The same industrial ingenuity that gave us vast refineries also transformed how grains were milled. For thousands of years, grains had been crushed slowly between stones, a process that left coarse bits of bran in the flour, full of fiber, oils, and minerals that both nourished and challenged the teeth and jaws. Then steel roller mills appeared. Patented in the 19th century, these machines stripped away the outer layers of grains with ruthless efficiency, leaving behind a fine, pale flour that was soft on the mouth, quick to bake, and devastatingly easy to digest into sugars.
Refined white flour became the darling of urban diets. Bakers could turn out fluffy loaves and delicate pastries that seemed like the pinnacle of civilized eating. But with this softness came a twofold problem. It demanded almost no chewing, robbing jaws of the mechanical stresses that once guided them to grow broad and strong. And it broke down swiftly into sugars that fed the acid-producing microbes in plaque. The combined assault of abundant sucrose and easily fermentable starch meant that mouths now faced round-the-clock acid attacks. Dental records from this period tell a stark story. In England, for instance, as sugar consumption skyrocketed in the 1800s, reports of tooth decay and extractions soared alongside it. Dentists, once a rare trade often combined with barbering or general surgery, suddenly found their services in explosive demand. It became common for adults to lose many or even most of their teeth by middle age. Visiting the dentist was less about preserving oral health than about brutal extractions to end the agony of abscesses and rotting roots. Even children were caught in this relentless tide. By the late 19th century, observers in both Europe and America noted alarming levels of cavities in young mouths. The idea that a child might reach adulthood with a full set of healthy teeth became almost quaint. School dental inspections in industrial cities frequently found children with multiple carious lesions, many already advanced to the point of infection. The link between this epidemic and the tidal wave of cheap sugar and refined flour was impossible to ignore. The industrial century didn't just change what people ate, it fundamentally altered how often they ate. Urban life with its factories and shops encouraged snacking throughout the day. Portable treats like sweet rolls, buns, biscuits, and later wrapped candies meant that mouths rarely returned to a neutral state. Each snack or sugary tea reset the clock on acid exposure, layering attack upon attack in a way that hunter-gatherers or even medieval farmers would never have encountered. Historians and anthropologists comparing pre-industrial and industrial era skulls find a dramatic contrast. Where once dental arches were wide and teeth generally free of significant decay, by the late 1800s, jaws were often pockmarked with cavities, teeth worn into irregular stumps, abscess channels burrowed through bone. The very face of humanity changed, not through slow evolutionary drift, but through the sudden dietary shock administered by modern industry. So, in the span of a single century, the bright promise of mass production, endless cakes, delicate breads, affordable confections for all, also delivered an unforeseen catastrophe. It turned robust mouths into fragile ecosystems overwhelmed by sugars and stripped of the natural defenses once provided by harder, more varied foods. Where powerful jaws and long-lived teeth had once been humanity's norm, they now became an increasingly rare inheritance, replaced by the vulnerable smiles that modern dentistry has been racing ever since to preserve and patch. In chasing the ease and pleasure offered by factories, society unknowingly orchestrated one of the most dramatic collapses of dental health ever recorded. A quiet calamity played out millions of times over, every time someone smiled through a mouth of cavities and lost teeth. When archaeologists open ancient graves, they often do so with delicate hands and reverent hearts, brushing away centuries of soil to reveal fragile traces of lives long extinguished. Among the most telling relics they find are not gilded ornaments or ceremonial weapons, but something far humbler. Teeth, locked in jaws that have waited patiently through millennia to whisper their stories. In these silent mouths, entire chronicles of human history unfold, layer by layer, root by root. Early on, as researchers began to systematically catalog skeletal remains from different eras, they noticed a pattern so consistent and startling it could scarcely be coincidence. Skulls dating back to the Paleolithic period, the long epochs when humans roamed as hunter-gatherers, almost always revealed dental arches in superb condition. The teeth, though sometimes worn flat from a lifetime of chewing coarse, unprocessed foods, sat aligned in wide, graceful curves. Cavities were astonishingly rare. Periodontal disease, the chronic infection of gums and bone that now plagues millions, was virtually non-existent. Even old age didn't seem to rot these robust mouths from within. It was only when they moved forward in time, into the Neolithic era, when humans first settled into farming life, that a different, darker dental tale emerged. As soon as grains became a staple, and communities clustered around fields rather than following herds, archaeologists began to see profound changes written in bone. Teeth showed unmistakable signs of decay. Small black pits near the gum line, larger cavities tunneling deep into dentin, sometimes entire crowns hollowed out, leaving only fragile shells. In many skulls, abscesses had drilled escape routes through the jawbone, the body's desperate attempt to relieve infection pressure by creating drainage pathways. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. In Paleolithic skulls, even those of individuals well past their prime, jaws looked almost pristine aside from expected wear. By comparison, Neolithic remains often appeared ravaged. The differences were so glaring that early researchers wondered if they were even looking at the same species. How could the same human anatomy yield such radically different outcomes in just a few thousand years? Detailed excavation records from sites across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East consistently reinforced this timeline. Hunter-gatherer burials, some 10,000 to 20,000 years old, routinely turned up skulls with full sets of teeth intact, roots clean and embedded firmly in dense bone. Moving forward to settlements just a few thousand years later, the pattern flipped. Missing teeth, signs of advanced periodontal disease, and in some grim examples, jaws so eaten through by abscess tracts that the infections must have caused chronic, unrelenting pain. Further investigations revealed that the problem wasn't merely local but global. Whether in early rice farming communities along the Yangtze, wheat cultivators in the Levant, or maize growers in pre-Columbian America, the shift to agriculture reliably coincided with a dramatic uptick in dental pathology. The culprit was as clear as the evidence was consistent. Diets heavy in fermentable carbohydrates, softer textures requiring less vigorous chewing, and all the downstream effects on saliva flow, bacterial balance, and mineral availability. One of the most haunting discoveries comes from microscopic analysis of dental plaque, calcified tartar that sometimes survives thousands of years on fossil teeth. In Paleolithic specimens, plaque analysis often reveals traces of meat fibers, plant starches, even pollen grains, all woven into a diverse, complex tapestry. Oral bacteria sampled from these deposits show a relatively balanced ecosystem, not dominated by the acid-loving strains that today flourish on sugar. But in Neolithic and later mouths, this balance skews dramatically. The communities of microbes shift toward those that thrive on a constant supply of starches, pumping out acids that drill mercilessly into enamel and dentin. It's not only cavities that tell the tale. The very structure of jaws changes under the new regime. Narrower arches, crowding, and misalignments start to appear. Indirect yet telling consequences of diets that failed to stimulate robust jaw growth. Archaeologists frequently find teeth overlapping awkwardly, twisted into positions that invite plaque buildup and make thorough cleaning nearly impossible. The combination of increased bacterial attack and more difficult natural cleaning set the stage for rampant decay and tooth loss. Perhaps the most chilling evidence lies in the bone itself. When a tooth becomes infected and an abscess forms at its root, the body sometimes reacts by resorbing the surrounding bone, carving out small caverns that act as pressure relief valves. Skull after skull from agricultural settlements bears these marks: hollowed pits around tooth roots, thin channels bored through the jaw to drain chronic infections. It's a sobering snapshot of lives lived with constant oral pain, long before any hope of antibiotics or skilled dental extraction. By comparing these archaeological records side by side, the narrative becomes unmistakable. Paleolithic mouths were not flawless in the cosmetic sense. Teeth could be heavily worn down, chipped, even broken from gnawing on tough fibers and grit-laced roots. But they were functionally healthy, stable, infection-resistant, and capable of lasting decades. Neolithic and later mouths, by contrast, bore all the hallmarks of a diet and lifestyle that sabotaged what evolution had long optimized. So when modern dentists puzzle over why humans seem so prone to cavities, crooked teeth, and chronic gum disease, they need only glance at these ancient skulls. The evidence is literally etched in stone, or in this case, bone. It's a testament to how swiftly our most foundational structures can deteriorate when we abandon the environmental cues that once shaped them so reliably. The archaeological trenches have become, unexpectedly, open-air dental clinics of the past, showing with painful clarity just how dramatically and how recently we lost the robust oral health that was once humanity's default inheritance.
If you could somehow shrink down to a microscopic scale and stroll across the slick surface of a tooth inside a Paleolithic mouth, the world you'd find there would be teeming with life, but remarkably balanced. Colonies of bacteria would cluster in intricate mosaics, feeding on tiny bits of leftover food, each species playing its part in a delicate ecosystem. For hundreds of thousands of years, this rich microbial community, what we now call the oral microbiome, existed in a kind of uneasy harmony, checked by the immune system, the cleansing rush of saliva, and by the very foods people chewed and swallowed each day. Fast forward to today, and that same stroll across a tooth would reveal a radically different landscape. Modern mouths are dominated by bacterial populations that thrive on sugars and refined carbohydrates, churning out acids that relentlessly erode enamel. It's a shift so profound that scientists studying fossilized dental plaque can pinpoint exactly when it began to spiral off course. Ancient tartar, or calculus, is like a biological time capsule. When researchers scrape tiny mineralized flakes from the teeth of hunter-gatherer skulls and analyze them under high-powered microscopes or sequence their preserved DNA, they find a surprisingly diverse array of bacteria. Many of these were the same species we still carry today. After all, humans have long shared core microbiota. But the relative balance among them was different. The acidogenic, cavity-causing strains existed, yet they were kept in check by competing bacteria and by the rough, fibrous foods that mechanically swept plaque away and stimulated copious saliva production. These ancestral microbiomes weren't sterile paradises, no mouth ever is, but they lived under conditions that prevented any one group from running amok. Coarse meats, tough roots, nuts, and wild fruits demanded rigorous chewing, bathing teeth in saliva rich in minerals and enzymes that neutralized acids. Tiny particles of grit from unprocessed food scoured teeth almost like a natural toothbrush. Together, these factors sustained a microbial balance that supported long-term oral health. Everything began to change with the rise of agriculture. As humans settled into farming life, diets shifted toward softer, carbohydrate-heavy staples like grains and later bread. With fewer mechanical forces cleaning tooth surfaces and more fermentable sugars lingering between meals, acid-loving bacteria gained a foothold. Streptococcus mutans, in particular, flourished. This species excels at metabolizing sugars into lactic acid, lowering pH right at the tooth surface, dissolving minerals out of enamel, and setting the stage for cavities. Then came the Industrial Revolution, flooding mouths with refined sugars and soft flours, creating a microbial paradise for acid-producing organisms. Studies comparing the dental calculus of industrial-era skulls to both medieval farmers and Paleolithic foragers show a striking shift. Diversity plummets while cavity-associated species soar. Modern mouths, it turns out, are often ecological monocultures dominated by a handful of opportunists. Their unchecked growth turning what was once a balanced habitat into a war zone of demineralization. It's not only cavities. This altered microbiome also plays a role in gum disease. Species like Porphyromonas gingivalis, which thrive in carbohydrate-rich, oxygen-poor pockets between teeth and gums, become more common in mouths constantly fed sticky, processed foods. These bacteria don't merely irritate gums, they can provoke an outsized immune response that leads to chronic inflammation, gradual destruction of connective tissues, and eventual tooth loss. What's especially sobering is how early these microbial shifts begin. Researchers analyzing dental plaque from children in high-sugar environments find similar bacterial profiles to adults with advanced decay. The modern diet effectively programs the oral ecosystem from the first years of life, selecting for communities that prioritize acid production over communal stability. In contrast, ancient children, whose diets were low in sugar and high in fibrous challenge, developed microbiomes more akin to balanced adult populations, their teeth protected from the start by a microbial guard that didn't tip so easily into pathogenic overdrive. So when we marvel at the near absence of cavities in Paleolithic skulls, it's not simply because their enamel was magically stronger or their genetics superior. It's because they hosted microbial communities adapted to a radically different environment. Their mouths were continuously bathed in saliva generated by hard chewing, kept alkaline by constant mechanical cleaning, and fed by diets that didn't provide endless simple sugars. The bacteria that could have caused rampant decay were there, but they were outcompeted, held in check by both food choices and physical forces. Modern dentistry fights this imbalance with fluoride, sealants, meticulous hygiene routines, and antibacterial rinses. But these are external attempts to rebalance an ecosystem that's already profoundly reshaped by diet. The real lesson from our ancestors is that the foods we eat don't just nourish us, they feed or starve entire microbial populations, tilting the balance toward either health or disease. Looking into the fossilized biofilms of ancient teeth is like peering into an evolutionary blueprint of what human mouths were designed to host. The stark difference between those ancient bacterial communities and our own isn't a trivial curiosity, it's a cautionary tale written in microscopic life. In it lies a powerful, if humbling, truth. We didn't just inherit strong jaws and wide arches from our forebears. We also inherited a partnership with microbes that once kept our teeth intact for decades. Only when we changed the rules of that relationship did the quiet catastrophe of modern dental disease truly begin. Imagine a clan of Paleolithic hunters seated around a smoldering fire at dusk, the smoky air rich with the scent of roasting flesh. Their latest kill, perhaps a deer or wild bison, lies in pieces nearby, each segment destined for eager hands. While some gnaw strips of meat, others focus on cracking open thick bones, wielding stones with practiced precision to split them. With a satisfying crack, the marrow is revealed, warm, fatty, dense with life's most primal nutrients. Children dip fingers into the marrow's silky depths, smearing it across lips and cheeks as mothers scoop it out and feed it to the youngest. This was not some occasional delicacy. For countless generations, bone marrow, brains, and the mineral-laden scraps clinging stubbornly to ribs and vertebrae were core staples. Every part of an animal was treasured, ensuring a steady influx of essential minerals, not just calcium and phosphorus, but also magnesium, zinc, and fat-soluble vitamins like D and K2 that orchestrate where these minerals ultimately go. By contrast, look at a typical modern attempt to get calcium, a splash of processed milk poured over sugary cereal, or a low-fat yogurt flavored with fruit concentrate. These foods are indeed fortified with calcium and phosphorus, but the context is profoundly different. The very structure of our diet, stripped of marrow, cartilage, organ meats, and even tiny edible bones once routinely chewed and swallowed, means we miss out on an entire matrix of supportive nutrients that guide minerals into teeth and bones. Paleolithic people didn't just consume calcium, they took in its perfect natural partners. Bone marrow and brains came rich with vitamin K2, which acts like a traffic conductor for calcium, telling it to embed in bones and teeth instead of wandering into arteries. Animal fat and organ meats brought ample vitamin D, crucial for absorbing calcium from the gut. The synergy was flawless, evolved over eons. Every bite of marrow or gnaw at cartilage was like swallowing a custom-tailored supplement precisely calibrated to fortify the skeleton and enamel.
Even the small game they consumed often ended up entirely inside the human body. Rabbits, birds, fish. Their tiny bones, softened by slow cooking or chewed directly, delivered microdoses of minerals wrapped in collagen and proteins that cushioned joints and fed connective tissues. This continuous trickle of bioavailable calcium and phosphorus didn't just build bone mass, it saturated growing teeth with exactly what enamel-forming cells needed to lay down resilient, acid-resistant surfaces. Contrast this with modern calcium delivery. Industrial dairies churn out milk stripped of fat, and therefore many fat-soluble vitamins, then artificially reintroduce vitamin D to compensate. Cheese and milk remain valuable calcium sources, but often appear alongside or inside highly processed foods loaded with sugars and additives that pull the body in the opposite direction, toward inflammation, imbalanced gut flora, and metabolic chaos that can all indirectly undermine mineral handling. Moreover, we rarely pair dairy with the marrow, liver, or oily fish that would provide the full symphony of cofactors needed to guide minerals properly. This matters because teeth are marvels of biological engineering that depend on far more than just raw calcium. Enamel is the hardest substance in the human body. Yet it grows from delicate, orchestrated layers laid down by specialized cells during childhood. If the bloodstream is rich with balanced minerals and supportive vitamins at precisely the right moments, enamel forms densely packed crystals that resist bacterial acid like a fortress. If not, it emerges porous, vulnerable to the slightest pH dip, inviting decay that begins invisibly and then erupts as familiar black craters. Paleolithic skulls show this process working near perfection. Even in individuals with heavy wear from decades of chewing gritty, fibrous food, the remaining enamel often holds firm, resisting deep penetration by bacteria. Meanwhile, modern teeth, nurtured on a diet heavy in refined grains and sugars, receiving calcium often without its full natural entourage, reveal weaker defenses. Thin enamel is quickly breached by acid, exposing softer dentin that bacteria exploit ruthlessly. There's another subtlety too: phosphorus. It is every bit as critical to tooth and bone health as calcium, working hand in hand to form the mineral matrix. Yet the modern diet often delivers phosphorus disproportionately through processed foods, rich in phosphates, sodas, processed meats, and packaged snacks, which may ironically lead to imbalances that trigger calcium to be pulled out of bones and teeth to maintain proper blood ratios. Our ancestors' phosphorus, by contrast, came bound to protein in meat, marrow, and small bones, accompanied by the natural checks and balances of evolution's long refinement. So, while it's common to hear advice to drink your milk for strong teeth, the story is vastly more complex. Milk can certainly help, but without the robust fat-soluble vitamin content of ancestral diets, and without the daily synergy of minerals from marrow, organ meats, and whole small animals, it is at best a partial substitute for what teeth once expected. Our ancestors essentially dosed themselves at every meal with a perfectly balanced blend of calcium, phosphorus, vitamins D and K2, magnesium, and collagen. Their teeth responded by growing dense, well-mineralized, resistant to both mechanical and bacterial attack. Our teeth, by comparison, often grow up malnourished despite the appearance of plenty. They're formed in an environment rich in calories, but sometimes poor in the very cofactors that would ensure each crystal of enamel is laid down at its hardest. It's a quiet vulnerability, often invisible until sugary modern diets provide the final insult that reveals how much weaker these structures truly are. In this way, the difference between our milk and their marrow isn't just poetic. It's a precise nutritional wrist that has helped turn once impervious teeth into fragile battlegrounds.
each cavity a testament to what we've lost in the evolution from marrow crackers to milk pourers. The robust smiles fossilized in ancient jaws aren't simply records of genetic luck. They are living proof of how profoundly diet not just our bodies, but the very fortress walls of our teeth. Picture the enamel on your teeth as a glittering coat of microscopic crystals, tightly packed hydroxyapatite that forms the hardest substance in the human body. It's designed to weather decades of chewing, grinding, even the occasional chip from a wayward olive pit. Yet this formidable armor faces a relentless assault, not from dramatic traumas, but from thousands of tiny skirmishes that play out daily, almost invisibly, inside your mouth. Each time you eat, a battle begins. The moment carbohydrates, especially sugars and refined starches, slip past your lips, bacteria in dental plaque spring into action. They feast on these simple molecules, rapidly fermenting them into organic acids. In just minutes, the pH at the surface of your teeth can plummet from a neutral 7 down to 5 or even lower. At these acidic levels, the crystalline structure of enamel starts to dissolve. Calcium and phosphate ions leach out into your saliva, weakening the armor that once seemed invincible.
This isn't a rare occurrence. In modern lifestyles, small snacks and drinks punctuate nearly every hour. A biscuit grabbed between meetings, a sip of sweetened coffee, a handful of crackers or fruit juice. Each feeding session for bacteria extends the acidic window. Your saliva does heroic work, gradually neutralizing acids and redepositing lost minerals in a process called remineralization. But when eating and drinking is near constant, saliva rarely gets the quiet time it needs to repair the battlefield. The mouth stays locked in a near-perpetual acid state, enamel caught in a slow-motion siege that eventually yields visible decay. Now place this pattern beside that of our distant ancestors. Their meals, though sometimes abundant, were dictated by the rigors of the hunt and the unpredictability of wild harvests. They didn't graze throughout the day. They'd feast after a successful kill or gather tubers and berries in specific windows, then go long stretches without food. These natural fasting periods gave saliva ample time to restore pH, to redeposit calcium and phosphate into tiny demineralized zones. Their enamel faced stresses from grit and fibrous foods, yes, but it rarely bathed in acid long enough for microscopic damage to grow into cavities. Even more striking was the very nature of their diet. Paleolithic foods contained almost no free sugars. Fruits were seasonal and modestly sweet, packed with fibrous matrices that slowed sugar release and promoted saliva flow. Vegetables and roots delivered complex carbs tied up in cellulose, demanding thorough chewing that stimulated protective saliva. There were no syrups, jams, sodas, or processed snacks flooding mouths with simple carbohydrates that oral bacteria so efficiently convert into acid. Their meals also included plenty of meat and fat, which don't fuel acid-producing bacteria at all. After tearing into sinewy muscle or slurping nutrient-rich marrow, there would be no pH plunge. In fact, these protein-rich meals sometimes nudged the mouth toward alkalinity, tipping the scale even further in favor of enamel preservation. Contrast this with the acidic bombardments we engineer today. Beyond bacterial fermentation, we consume acids directly. Citrus juices, sodas fizzing with carbonic acid, vinegary salad dressings, even healthy kombuchas. Each swig brings a fresh wave of enamel-softening exposure. When teeth are already slightly demineralized from bacterial acids, this direct acid contact compounds the damage. The softened enamel becomes susceptible to being literally brushed away if teeth are cleaned immediately afterward. A cruel irony of modern oral hygiene. Ancient humans had no such direct acid threats.
Without citrus groves engineered for hypersweetness, without carbonated drinks or pickled snacks at every turn, their teeth avoided these constant pH insults. Even their drinking water, untouched by flavorings, sugars, or carbonation, helped maintain a neutral mouth environment. This meant that while their enamel might show flat wear from years of chewing gritty plants or sinewy hides, it was rarely pocked with the lesions we now know as caries. So in many ways, modern enamel isn't failing because it's inherently weaker. It's under siege by a dietary environment radically different from anything our teeth evolved to handle. Constant snacking, refined carbs, hidden sugars, and direct acid exposures have created conditions that enamel simply wasn't built to withstand. Where ancient meals gave saliva long recovery windows and challenged jaws in ways that stimulated protective flow, our habits keep mouths locked in a corrosive state from dawn's first sweetened coffee to midnight's last nibble. And so, every day, a quiet war rages on the surface of your teeth, a war your ancestors rarely had to fight. Their enamel bore the marks of a rugged life, smoothed by fibers and sand, but it endured because it was rarely bathed in the acids that now define our diets. Modern mouths, meanwhile, wear the scars of a world where sweetness and sourness are always at hand, and the timeless protective cycles of remineralization are constantly interrupted by our next small indulgence. In this way, each bite and sip isn't just a fleeting pleasure. It's a move on the long-term chessboard of dental survival, one that our ancestors navigated almost unconsciously, simply by living in a world free from the constant temptations that so beautifully and so destructively define ours. Imagine the tender bones of an infant's skull, pliable, teeming with growth signals, ready to respond to every push and pull the world provides. At birth, these tiny structures are marvels of evolutionary engineering, designed to mold and expand in perfect harmony with the demands of breathing, feeding, and eventually speaking. For hundreds of thousands of years, the natural forces acting on a child's developing mouth and jaws were remarkably consistent. But in the modern age, these forces have changed so drastically that we've unwittingly rewritten the blueprint for the human face. It all starts with how a baby feeds. For most of our species' history, infants nursed at their mother's breast not just for months, but often for 2 to 3 years. This wasn't simply about nutrition or immunity. It was also mechanical training. When a baby breastfeeds, the tongue must press powerfully against the nipple and the upper palate, drawing milk out through coordinated suction that works the entire set of muscles around the mouth, jaw, and neck. The lower jaw moves in rhythmic, vigorous motions that stimulate growth at the joints and encourage the palate to widen. This is nature's original orthodontics, guiding the palate to grow broad and gently arched, shaping the dental arch even before teeth erupt. The pressure from the tongue during suckling helps mold the upper jaw outward, ensuring there's ample space for teeth to line up in the years ahead. Today, however, breastfeeding is often cut short or replaced entirely by bottles. Bottle feeding demands far less muscular effort. The nipple is firmer and longer, delivering milk with minimal compression or suction. The tongue doesn't press against the roof of the mouth in the same dynamic way, and the jaw doesn't have to pull with force. This means less stimulus for the upper jaw to expand sideways. The palate often grows high and narrow rather than wide and shallow, reducing the real estate available for future teeth. Then there's the food we give once breastfeeding or bottle feeding begins to wane. Modern weaning diets frequently rely on smooth purees and mashed foods that slide effortlessly down the throat. From pouches of blended fruits to bowls of soft cereal, little mouths learn to swallow without much chewing. Compare this to the diets of our ancestors' toddlers, who quickly graduated to gnawing on small pieces of meat, fibrous vegetables, and even tough roots. These ancient weaning foods forced children to chew, activating their jaw muscles, stimulating bone growth, and guiding the teeth and dental arches to widen properly. Without this demanding workout, today's children often grow jaws that are simply too small for the full set of adult teeth waiting to emerge. The result? Crowding, misalignments, and the narrow dental arches that send families rushing to orthodontists. Modern faces tend to be longer and narrower, with less forward growth of the upper and lower jaws, setting up bite issues that go far beyond aesthetics.
The changes ripple outward. A narrow palate often means a smaller nasal airway, making it harder to breathe through the nose. This encourages chronic mouth breathing, especially at night, which in turn alters tongue posture and can compound the jaw's tendency to grow downward instead of outward. The cascade continues into sleep quality, speech development, and even posture. It's a profound irony. In our quest to make life easier for babies, to give them soft foods, to bottle feed for convenience, to soothe them with squeezable pouches, we've stripped away the very challenges that their developing bones and muscles evolved to expect. Nature counted on breastfeeding and tough early foods to signal jaws to grow wide and strong. Without those signals, the mouth's architecture builds itself on incomplete instructions. Research in orthodontics and pediatric development is starting to confirm what anthropologists have long observed in skeletal remains. Hunter-gatherer children developed remarkably broad dental arches and robust jaws, rarely needing the interventions that are almost routine for modern kids. Their diets and feeding patterns naturally sculpted their faces to accommodate a full set of straight teeth. Today, clinicians experimenting with harder weaning foods and extended breastfeeding see measurable differences in jaw width and arch development, even within the span of early childhood. This doesn't mean returning to a world of foraged roots and hunted meats, but it does highlight the importance of reintroducing more chewing, more muscular engagement, and longer natural feeding wherever possible. So the next time we see a toddler with a pouch of perfectly smooth applesauce, it's worth remembering that behind that easy swallow lies a missed opportunity. Those soft meals may be gentle on the gums, but they also deprive growing jaws of the mechanical signals that tell them expand, strengthen, make room. And decades later, the results appear in crowded smiles, impacted wisdom teeth, and the quiet frustration of needing metal braces to force teeth into spaces that evolution once expected to be there all along. Picture a child asleep in soft lamplight, lips parted just enough that a faint rasp of breath escapes. It looks innocent, even sweet. But beneath that gentle rise and fall of the chest, something far more consequential is unfolding. Something that can change the very architecture of the face. Because when a child sleeps with an open mouth, it's not simply air moving differently. It's a subtle, persistent force reshaping bones, muscles, and ultimately the entire map of the jaws. Modern life is filled with silent saboteurs of nasal breathing. Allergies inflame passages, making it harder to pull air through the nose. Swollen adenoids and tonsils, often a response to chronic irritants or infections, block airflow and force mouths open, especially at night. Even the design of our environments, with processed air, dust-laden interiors, and chemical residues, contributes to respiratory irritation. For countless children and many adults, mouth breathing becomes the default, not the exception. But why does this matter so profoundly for the face and teeth?
The answer lies in how the tongue and surrounding muscles interact with developing bones. In a naturally closed-mouth posture, the lips are sealed and the tongue rests gently but firmly against the roof of the mouth. This constant upward pressure serves as a living retainer, guiding the upper jaw, the maxilla, to widen and grow forward. The palate becomes broad and U-shaped, creating ample room for teeth to erupt in orderly rows and supporting the nasal airway above. When the mouth hangs open, whether because of blocked nasal passages, habit, or simply inattentive posture, the tongue drops to the floor of the mouth. That critical outward and upward force disappears. The palate tends to rise and narrow under the unopposed inward pull of cheek muscles. The dental arch constricts, teeth jostle for space, and the middle of the face grows longer and more recessed. The result is often the telltale narrow face with crowded teeth and a high vaulted palate, a structural shift that doesn't just affect the smile, but also tightens the airway, making nasal breathing even harder. Contrast this with our Paleolithic ancestors. Archaeological studies of skulls from hunter-gatherer populations consistently reveal wide palates, broad dental arches, and strong forward-positioned jaws. These people lived outdoors, in environments free from modern pollutants, artificial allergens, or ultra-processed foods that contribute to chronic inflammation. They spent their days breathing clean air through spacious nasal passages, with tongues habitually pressing against the palate, sculpting faces into balanced, functional forms. What's more, their robust chewing on tough meats, fibrous vegetables, and hard nuts not only exercised jaw muscles but also encouraged nasal breathing. Chewing with the mouth closed naturally promotes nose breathing. The powerful rhythmic action helps ventilate the sinuses, keeping them clear. In this way, diet and airway health worked hand in hand, reinforcing each other over years of growth. Modern research into children with enlarged adenoids or chronic mouth breathing shows just how quickly facial changes set in. These children often develop what's called adenoid face, a long, narrow visage with a small chin and an open mouth resting posture. Their dental arches become cramped, teeth emerge crooked, and the airway space reduces further, creating a vicious cycle. Sleep quality suffers, oxygen levels dip, and the cascade continues. Perhaps most striking of all, orthodontists and airway-focused dentists are now finding that correcting mouth posture and restoring nasal breathing, sometimes through myofunctional therapy, sometimes through minor surgical interventions, can gradually redirect growth back toward a more balanced ancestral pattern. The bones of a child's face remain remarkably responsive, reshaping under the gentle insistence of proper muscle tone and tongue position. When we look back at Paleolithic skulls, we don't see these modern afflictions etched in bone. Their broad palates and well-aligned teeth aren't just artifacts of diet or luck. They also reflect lifetimes of nasal breathing that set tongues in their natural place. These ancient faces stand as living fossils of what human craniofacial growth was designed to become, guided by forces that we today often disrupt without even realizing it. So while orthodontic braces and palate expanders might try to correct what's already misaligned, the deeper lesson is clear. Our ancestors unconsciously harnessed a simple, powerful tool, nose breathing with the tongue up, mouth closed, to grow faces that effortlessly fit all their teeth and supported free, unobstructed airflow. In the gentle habit of how we breathe, they found nature's blueprint for strong jaws and wide smiles, a blueprint still coded in us, waiting to be reclaimed with every quiet, nasal breath. There's a common assumption, almost a comforting modern myth, that our ancient ancestors must have lived in constant dental agony. That yes, maybe they had broad jaws and straight teeth in youth, but surely by old age their mouths were riddled with problems, teeth dropping out as they gnawed at tough hides by smoky fires. It seems easier to believe this than to accept that we might be the first truly tooth-sick generations in human history. But the evidence tells a more nuanced story. When anthropologists examine the jaws of Paleolithic elders, they do sometimes find missing teeth. It's true that heavy use over decades could wear molars nearly flat, and now and then a tooth might be lost to an infection or simply to the relentless grind of grit-laced food. Yet what's remarkable is that these cases were infrequent and often isolated. A single gap here or there didn't generally spread into widespread rot or collapsing dental arches. Most older hunter-gatherers maintained surprisingly intact mouths into advanced age. And what about longevity? Critics often say, of course they had good teeth. They didn't live long enough for them to decay. Yet modern studies of hunter-gatherer groups show that once individuals survived the hazards of infancy and accidents of youth, many did reach what we'd consider middle or older adulthood. Paleolithic humans who passed childhood could easily live into their 50s or beyond. In skeletal remains, we see tooth wear typical of decades of heavy chewing, but only modest signs of the rampant cavities and root infections that plague modern seniors. When extreme dental breakdown did occur, it was typically in the very oldest skeletons, with teeth worn so thin they cracked or exposed softer layers underneath. Even then, these weren't always infected. The enamel wore from use, not from bacterial acid. Their biggest dental enemy at the threshold of life wasn't sugar-fueled cavities, but simply the mechanical fatigue of a lifetime's worth of chewing, a fundamentally different problem from our chemically eroded, cavity-riddled modern mouths. This raises an urgent, tantalizing question. Is it possible for us to reclaim something of their jaw strength and natural dental harmony? Could modern humans, through choice rather than necessity, guide their faces to develop more like those of our rugged ancestors? Across the world, small experiments are already underway. Some dentists, orthodontists, and even curious parents are encouraging children to chew real fibrous foods early, offering them strips of meat on the bone, thick raw carrot sticks, or chunks of apple instead of squeezable fruit pouches and soft crackers. The idea is to force the jaws to work hard, activating the muscles that pull on growing bones, stimulating them to widen naturally and accommodate all incoming adult teeth without crowding. This approach is rooted not in romantic nostalgia, but in biomechanics. Bone grows along the lines of force applied to it. By mimicking the tough chewing demands of pre-industrial diets, these families hope to avoid or minimize braces later on. Adults, too, experiment with diet in an effort to toughen their jaws and support dental health. Advocates of ancestral eating emphasize not just cutting processed sugars, but also consuming nutrient-dense organ meats, marrow, and tougher cuts that require serious mastication. Some even practice deliberate chewing exercises to strengthen the masseter and surrounding muscles, hoping to subtly influence facial structure and stabilize dental arches. The results vary. After all, once adult bone growth slows, changes come incrementally. But with children, whose faces are still astonishingly malleable, small shifts in diet and habit can lead to measurable differences in jaw width and palate shape in just a few years. This is why some orthodontists are integrating myofunctional therapy, exercises that train tongue posture and strengthen chewing alongside traditional braces, attempting to recreate the robust growth signals that nature once supplied effortlessly. Perhaps the most striking evidence that this isn't just hopeful theory comes from direct observation of people still living in ways reminiscent of our distant past. Dental anthropologists have traveled to remote regions of Africa, South America, and the Pacific Islands to study tribes whose diets remain largely untouched by industrial foods. These communities typically consume minimally processed roots, fibrous leaves, whole fruits, wild or pastured meats, and importantly, they chew a lot. Their mouths tell a powerful story. Even well into adulthood, individuals in these groups exhibit wide dental arches, teeth that erupt in neat alignment without orthodontic intervention, and astonishingly low rates of cavities despite brushing infrequently or not at all. Their microbiomes stay balanced thanks to diets low in free sugars and high in natural cleansing fibers. The physical demands of tearing, grinding, and crushing maintain jaw strength and encourage continuous saliva flow, which bathes teeth in protective minerals. Some field dentists and anthropologists, peering into these mouths with a mix of awe and professional envy, have noted that the rare cases of decay tend to cluster around individuals who've had the most contact with market towns and processed treats. A single small store selling candy can begin to disrupt a dental heritage thousands of years in the making.
So, as we puzzle over how our ancestors managed to keep such naturally aligned, long-lasting teeth without orthodontists, fluoride toothpaste, or antiseptic mouthwash, we discover a surprising conclusion. Their secret wasn't magic genetics or brief lifespans that spared them decay. It was daily life itself. The foods they ate, the forces they placed on their jaws, the microbiomes they nurtured. In trying to replicate even small pieces of this, giving our children tougher foods, encouraging closed-mouth nasal breathing, restoring missing nutrients like K2 found in marrow and organ meats, we aren't reaching backward out of nostalgia. We're simply recognizing that our jaws, teeth, and faces are still built by the same ancient rules, waiting for the right signals to guide them into strength and harmony once more. It's not about becoming cave people again, it's about reclaiming the timeless forces that shaped the robust smiles of those who came long before us. Talk to almost any orthodontist today, and you'll hear a familiar blend of triumph and frustration. On the one hand, braces and aligners have revolutionized the way we straighten teeth, offering dazzling before and after stories that seem to defy nature. Crooked smiles become radiant, jaws are subtly guided, bites corrected. Yet beneath this surface success lies a stubborn truth that specialists see every day. These interventions often address symptoms, not root causes. Once the wires come off and retainers go in, nature doesn't simply accept the new arrangement. It tends to tug teeth back toward old misalignments, revealing just how deep the original problem runs. Why is this? Modern orthodontists know that by the time they first fit brackets onto a teenager's teeth, the fundamental blueprint for that mouth was laid down years earlier. The narrow arches, the high constricted palate, the crowded or rotated teeth, these are architectural outcomes of years when the jaw could have grown differently but didn't. From infancy, soft diets, short breastfeeding durations, and chronic mouth breathing often deprive the developing face of the forces it needed to expand fully. The tongue may have rested low, failing to press outward on the palate, while muscles around the mouth exerted gentle inward pressure, shaping narrower arches. By the time permanent teeth push through, there simply isn't enough room. Braces work by carefully applying tension to move teeth into better positions, but they rarely broaden the actual jaw bones to the dimensions evolution once expected. Orthodontists sometimes extract teeth to create space or use expanders in younger patients to nudge palates outward. But these are controlled mechanical interventions. They don't replicate the robust, daily, whole face forces that once naturally sculpted wide dental arches through hard chewing and proper tongue posture.
That's why so many patients finish orthodontic treatment
only to discover they must wear retainers indefinitely. Without constant gentle pressure from correctly aligned muscles, teeth drift. The body hasn't forgotten the cramped blueprint set in early childhood. It still tries to follow it. This deep vulnerability of our enamel and alignment isn't helped by another modern betrayal: our faith in healthy sugars. Walk into any health-focused grocery aisle and you'll see juices and dried fruits proudly labeled with promises of natural goodness. Parents fill lunchboxes with fruit leathers, pour big glasses of orange or apple juice, convinced they're choosing wisely. After all, these are fruits, the very epitome of a balanced diet, aren't they? But even natural sugars are sugars, and the bacteria on our teeth care nothing for whether that glucose or fructose came from a gummy bear or a pressed organic apple. Once consumed, these sugars bathe the mouth in fermentable carbohydrates that plaque bacteria feast upon, producing acids that erode enamel. What's worse, fruit juices concentrate sugars into a liquid form that floods every crevice of the mouth, sticking around far longer than a quick bite of whole fruit. Many juices are also acidic by nature, compounding the attack by directly softening the enamel surface. So what do today's orthodontists and preventive dentists quietly wish every parent knew? That protecting teeth and jaws starts long before braces. It's about fostering habits that give jaws the broad canvas they need. Extended breastfeeding, encouraging children to choose solid, fibrous foods early, watching for signs of mouth breathing that could signal airway problems, and limiting the constant exposure to sugars, natural or otherwise, that shift the bacterial balance in harmful directions. They also know that once enamel is eroded by repeated acid attacks, it doesn't regenerate. The minerals can be partially restored by saliva, but the tight, pristine crystal structure that resists deep bacterial invasion is never fully replaced. That's why prevention is so crucial. Our ancestors rarely faced constant acid challenges. Their sporadic encounters with tart fruits were balanced by long stretches without sugar, giving saliva time to remineralize microscopic soft spots before they grew into cavities. In this way, the advice from modern orthodontists often circles right back to the ancient wisdom written in fossil jaws. Strong teeth and wide smiles aren't built in the orthodontist's chair. They start with the everyday forces and foods that nature expected. Habits that once effortlessly crafted faces broad enough to hold every tooth in calm, functional alignment, with little fear of even the gentlest bite into life's sweetness. Look closely at any modern city street, at the people passing by with their coffee cups, energy bars, earbuds in place, and you'll see a quiet paradox written across countless faces. Perfectly aligned teeth, sculpted jaws, broad smiles. These remain the beauty ideals plastered across billboards and magazine covers. Yet beneath that cultural obsession with dazzling smiles, something far more basic has gone missing. The natural, effortless harmony of teeth and jaws that was once simply a birthright for our ancestors now so often requires years of orthodontic intervention, retainers worn night after night, and strict dental routines that never seem to quite solve the underlying problem. It's tempting to believe that diligent brushing and flossing are enough, that with fluoride toothpaste and semi-annual cleanings, we can fully protect what nature gave us. But human mouths were never designed to survive on toothbrushes alone. The broader forces that shape robust jaws, guide teeth into orderly rows, and keep enamel strong start long before a toothbrush ever touches a molar. They begin with what we eat, how we breathe, and the subtle, constant workouts we give our jaws every time we chew. Imagine the daily life of a young hunter-gatherer thousands of years ago. Every meal was a mechanical challenge. Tough fibers, sinewy meats, crisp skins, gritty roots, each demanded prolonged chewing. Those repeated stresses didn't just process food, they pulled on bones, activated growth plates, and signaled the jaws to broaden, creating ample space for every tooth. This natural expansion also meant that the tongue could rest comfortably against a wide palate, guiding it into a gentle U shape instead of the pinched V that so often plagues modern mouths. Contrast that to what we often hand children today. Squeeze pouches of fruit puree that glide down with barely a lick of chewing. Soft breads, fluffy pancakes, processed cheese slices that dissolve instantly. It's no wonder so many young jaws grow narrow. Their arches constrict, and teeth have nowhere to line up but in awkward, overlapping rows. By the time braces enter the picture, the deeper structural signals that once shaped robust faces are long absent. So what can we actually do now in our kitchens and homes to reclaim even a fragment of that natural process? It starts with reconsidering texture as much as nutrients. Chewing isn't just a chore, it's the original orthodontic appliance. Encouraging kids and even adults to work through tougher foods helps exercise the masseter and temporalis muscles, stimulating the bones they attach to. Crunching raw carrots or apples, chewing strips of meat that resist a little before yielding, letting children nibble on corn still on the cob or tear into pieces of dark, crusty bread. These aren't nostalgic habits, they're profound biological triggers. Breathing, too, carries enormous influence. Our ancestors didn't spend long hours indoors breathing filtered, sometimes allergen-laden air. They had wide nasal passages, clear from the start by virtue of an outdoor life and diets that promoted low inflammation. Nose breathing naturally keeps the mouth closed, with the tongue gently pressing against the roof. This simple posture is no small matter. It's a silent, ever-present guide that helps the upper jaw grow outward and forward. In children today, mouth breathing caused by allergies, enlarged tonsils, or simple habitual slackness can quietly distort this process. The tongue rests low, the palate narrows, and soon enough there's little room for adult teeth to erupt cleanly. But the evidence tells a more nuanced story. When anthropologists examine the jaws of Paleolithic elders, they do sometimes find missing teeth. It's true that heavy use over decades could wear molars nearly flat, and now and then a tooth might be lost to an infection or simply to the relentless grind of grit-laced food. Yet what's remarkable is that these cases were infrequent and often isolated. A single gap here or there didn't generally spread into widespread rot or collapsing dental arches. Most older hunter-gatherers maintained surprisingly intact mouths into advanced age. And what about longevity? Critics often say, of course they had good teeth. They didn't live long enough for them to decay. Yet modern studies of hunter-gatherer groups show that once individuals survived the hazards of infancy and accidents of youth, many did reach what we'd consider middle or older adulthood. Paleolithic humans who passed childhood could easily live into their 50s or beyond. In skeletal remains, we see tooth wear typical of decades of heavy chewing, but only modest signs of the rampant cavities and root infections that plague modern seniors. When extreme dental breakdown did occur, it was typically in the very oldest skeletons, with teeth worn so thin they cracked or exposed softer layers underneath. Even then, these weren't always infected. The enamel wore from use, not from bacterial acid. Their biggest dental enemy at the threshold of life wasn't sugar-fueled cavities, but simply the mechanical fatigue of a lifetime's worth of chewing, a fundamentally different problem from our chemically eroded, cavity-riddled modern mouths. This raises an urgent, tantalizing question. Is it possible for us to reclaim something of their jaw strength and natural dental harmony? Could modern humans, through choice rather than necessity, guide their faces to develop more like those of our rugged ancestors? Across the world, small experiments are already underway. Some dentists, orthodontists, and even curious parents are encouraging children to chew real fibrous foods early, offering them strips of meat on the bone, thick raw carrot sticks, or chunks of apple instead of squeezable fruit pouches and soft crackers. The idea is to force the jaws to work hard, activating the muscles that pull on growing bones, stimulating them to widen naturally and accommodate all incoming adult teeth without crowding. This approach is rooted not in romantic nostalgia, but in biomechanics. Bone grows along the lines of force applied to it. By mimicking the tough chewing demands of pre-industrial diets, these families hope to avoid or minimize braces later on. In the end, caring for teeth is less about waging an endless war with a toothbrush against bacterial invaders, and more about living in ways that honor the deep, ancient dialogue between food, breath, muscle, and bone. By restoring even a fraction of those natural forces, we begin to rewrite the story of our mouths, not back to some mythical past, but forward, into a future where robust jaws and healthy smiles become normal once again, not a luxury sculpted by orthodontic wires. And in that, we come full circle to the silent wisdom still etched in the strong, orderly teeth of our long-ago kin, whispering across time that they grew not by accident, but by the simple, everyday demands of a life that our biology still remembers. Imagine for a moment the door to a sleek, modern dental office swinging open, the faint smell of antiseptic and the gentle hum of polishing tools filling the bright space. Now picture, stepping awkwardly across the threshold, a figure clad in rough hides, hair tangled by years under open skies, skin toughened by sun and wind. This is a visitor from a time long before cities, toothbrushes, or neatly scheduled cleanings, a Paleolithic hunter-gatherer who somehow wandered into our polished world of reclined chairs and bright LED lamps. The receptionist might blink in confusion, but eventually this strange patient is led to the chair. The dentist, clipboard in hand, leans forward for the usual polite small talk, only to freeze mid-sentence as the patient parts his lips. Inside that weather-worn face is a mouth most practitioners today only see in textbooks of ideal occlusion. Rows of teeth sit in a broad, graceful arch, aligned with such precision that they look almost artificially placed. The molars show wear, sure. Decades of tearing and grinding tough foods have smoothed down the biting surfaces. But there are no twisted incisors battling for space, no canines turned sideways in a desperate bid to fit, no telltale dark patches betraying cavities burrowing into enamel. The dentist might shine a bright light, probe around with a mirror, check the gums for swelling or bleeding. Instead, they'd find firm, healthy tissue hugging teeth in tight collars, no pockets of bacteria, no hidden infections. The wisdom teeth, those notorious troublemakers that modern jaws so often fail to accommodate, would be sitting right there, fully erupted, calmly aligned, as if they'd been welcomed from the start. It would likely leave the professional momentarily speechless. Here is a patient who's never flossed, never rinsed with antiseptic mouthwash, never had a fluoride varnish or a filling. Yet the evidence is right there. Nature, given the right inputs, can build a mouth that outperforms even our best modern efforts. Of course, the dentist might cautiously explain modern routines, how we clean away sticky plaque, how we monitor for tiny lesions, how we fit teenagers with braces and retainers for years to coax teeth into place. The visitor would probably just nod, bemused, having lived a life where food itself, its toughness, its variety, its demand for vigorous chewing, did all the work that today requires wires, brackets, and scheduled adjustments. Where constant nasal breathing and a tongue that pressed naturally against the palate formed an arch wide enough to welcome every tooth without a struggle. And if the dentist leaned back at the end of this surreal consultation, tapping the chart with a thoughtful sigh, perhaps they'd murmur something that cuts to the core of what all this history shows us. A little bit of wildness is exactly what our mouths still crave. Not in the sense of abandoning hygiene or reveling in grime, but by reintroducing the simple forces our biology expects. Encouraging real chewing with fibrous, varied foods, fostering proper tongue posture and nasal breathing, limiting the near-constant bathing of teeth in modern sugars and acids. It's almost poetic to realize that the key to many of our dental struggles isn't more advanced gadgets or ever finer brushes. It's a quiet return to the elemental challenges that once made human jaws strong and smiles naturally aligned. A gentle rediscovery of how texture, effort, and unprocessed eating guided bones and teeth into lasting health long before dentists ever existed. So if that old hunter-gatherer did rise from prehistory and sit under the cold glare of our overhead lights, perhaps he'd grin, confused by our sophisticated charts and drills, but blissfully unaware of the problems we've invented for ourselves. And in that unself-conscious, perfectly aligned smile would be a final, undeniable lesson. Sometimes the best design is the one that needed no intervention at all, only the steady shaping hand of nature working through a life less cushioned and more demanding. The kind of life that, in small, thoughtful doses, might still save our own modern teeth from the quiet decay of too much comfort.